Hey folks, Kyle here. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. I'm making a game about restoring color to the world called Farewell North. It's an open-world adventure exploration game with hints of puzzles and stealth elements, and you play as a border collie traveling a chain of dark islands with your human companion, restoring color to the world one island at a time. It's still early days on the game, but it is listed on Steam now, so if you wanted to support development, please consider wishlisting. It just takes a second and it means a ton. Alright, with that done, let's get into the devlog. So seeing as this is the 13th devlog, I thought it was fitting to finally introduce the first monster of the game, which I've been working on recently. Before we do that though, I want to show you some of the improvements I've been making based on your feedback, and give a thank you to all of those who've left comments and suggestions on how we can improve the game. So first up, in the last video I showed you this new perspective-based puzzle, where there are objects hidden in the environment where you can only unlock them by pinging color when you have the right perspective. So for instance, I showed these bridges where you have to basically look at them from the correct angle in order to activate them. A lot of you guys mentioned that this was too arbitrary and too difficult. There was no way for the player to really know what the correct angle was. And one thing I did was I built a tool to basically randomize the correct perspective and see if I could solve it, and the answer was no, I couldn't. So one comment had an interesting idea of basically having the object be visible but broken in the environment until you look at it from the correct perspective. So what I did was go into Blender and basically shatter the objects, so you can see here that they break apart into multiple pieces. So I brought these back into the game and basically, using the correct perspective, move the objects away in a way where when you're looking at it from the wrong angle, it appears broken, but when you're looking at it from the correct angle, it appears fixed. This way the player has a hint and visual aid as to what the correct perspective is, and it's not so arbitrary. So you can see here this randomization where the red arrow is changing every time I play the game. And so using this, I was able to prove to myself that this is actually solvable now, whereas the old version wasn't. So if we look at the real in-game example again, when you approach the bridge from straight on, it's very clearly broken, but it's still visible. I still need to work out how this is going to play in with the fog, because of the way that the transparencies work, it's a little tricky. However, the correct solution is now much more clear, because when you go to the side, the bridge is much more intact, and in fact, when you look at it perfectly, it's fully intact. When you ping color, then the bridge is fully restored, and if we go back out, you can now cross the bridge. So I think this is a lot less arbitrary, it's a little more clear to the player, and I still need to play with it, but I think it's definitely along the right track. So thank you for all the feedback on that. Another area I've been working on this last few weeks has been the animations. So since I started showing off this game, I've been getting a lot of feedback about the animation quality not being that great, and I completely agree, animation is definitely not my strong suit. However, I do think that after a few more passes, I'll be able to get this to an area where the animations look good and fluid and natural. So, two areas this month that I've been working on have been the canoe animations and the movement animations of the dog. So this is the old canoe animation, and you can see it's very stiff and rigid, and the paddle kind of slides around in the hands quite a bit, especially as they're going back and forth. This animation is probably the hardest animation I have in the game because of the way that the paddle needs to go back and forth from side to side. I've tried 3 entirely different techniques for how to do this. So one was just to do straight animation, one was to use inverse kinematics on the hands to move them to the paddle, and one was to use inverse kinematics from the paddle to move them to the hand procedurally during runtime. But nothing has really given great results. So this month I wanted to basically just take another pass at these and try and improve them. So I'm using a new tool called Humanoid, which is a Unity plugin that basically completely replaces the built-in animation system and makes it much more usable for humanoid animations and that kind of thing. This way I don't need to go back and forth from Blender to Unity. The workflow is just much easier to work with. So far I'm liking it. I'm just using the free version of it, but there is a paid version I might check out if this continues to be something I want to experiment with. While I was looking up different references for different canoe animations, I learned about something called the J-stroke. And basically the J-stroke is a paddling technique where you can paddle on one side of a canoe and still always go straight. So it's just a way you kind of flick the paddle towards the end of the stroke. This was kind of an interesting idea because the hardest part about the paddle animation has been the passing back and forth, as I said. So if I was able to cut that out, that would make my life a lot easier. So I did play with this, and I did some simple tests with using a J-stroke animation just to get a feel for it and see if this is something that I wanted to go with. And the problem that I found is the way that I have the control set up for the canoe is that the right trigger paddles on the right side or turns right, the left trigger paddles on the left side or turns left, and paddling on both sides by holding both triggers will make you go forward. And I quite like this control scheme. It's just different than like WASD or using the joystick. And so by switching to the J-stroke, it made my life a lot easier on the animation side. However, it doesn't feel as good to play, and it might be a more efficient stroke, and maybe that's something that she would know and want to use, but as a player, it's just not as interesting because you lose the ability to use the two-trigger approach and you just go back to WASD or using the joystick, and I just don't think it's as interesting. So as excited as I was to cut out the back and forth by using the J-stroke technique, I just don't think it's worth it. So I am going to continue with the paddling on both sides, and I did a whole other pass of the animation. I think it is looking better. It's still not perfect, but the paddle no longer clips with the canoe. Her hands are much more fixed to the paddle, and I played with a lot of the timing of the passing the paddle back and forth, and I do think it's looking better. But it's probably going to take another pass or two before this is something I'm really happy with. But let me know your thoughts down below, what you think of the current state of it. Do you think this looks better, or is it all in my head and wishful thinking? So the other animation improvements I was working on this month were for the dog's movement animations. So I actually found that there was a bug in the old implementation where I was moving the dog more than the actual animation was moving, and so that made it feel like he was kind of gliding across the ground. But as you can see here, when there's no grass, it very clearly makes contact now, and his feet actually look like they're moving him through the world, which is exactly what you want. So I'm really glad to have that bug sorted. It was subtle, but it was enough that people were calling it out quite regularly, so that's a pretty happy, big win for me. So yeah, it just feels much more natural now, feels much more in contact with the world around him, and I think when you're playing the game, it feels much more satisfying too, so quite happy with that. There are still a couple issues with turns where they look a little bit glidey, but overall I think it's a big improvement. So the final bit of improvement that has come from the community has been the way that I'm handling the localization credits. So if you're not familiar, I've been using Localizer for translating the game, so we have a whole group of people on Discord who've been helping to translate into about 20 different languages. And so this website Localizer basically allows you to upload all the strings, people will translate them, vote on the best translations and everything, and then you can export the translated files. But one thing I wanted to do was put the names of all the translators into the credits to say thank you for helping out, and unfortunately Localizer doesn't really offer anything with that. However, they do have a leaderboard for each language, and so I'm able to get the names there. So what I did was I built a tool to basically generate the credits because I didn't want to have to do this manually and risk leaving someone behind or messing something up. And so basically I built a tool and a button into Unity where I can just click and it will automatically generate all the credits. So I just go Tools, Feral North, Credits, build localization credits, and just takes a few seconds. And this is basically going to fetch all the data from Localizer, and it's going to generate all the credits. So you can see all these files that just got created here. These are all the individual credits. So it finds all the languages, it creates a header, and it creates a name, or a list of names for each language, and it injects them into the credits page. And so if I run the game now, all the localization credits will be properly in place, and everyone can get credit. So one thing left to do here is that some people might want to use their real name or a different pseudonym than what their username in Localizer is. And so we're working out a process for how that's going to work, but someone in the Discord offered to build a bot where they can you can type in a command to say, I want to convert my name from, name A on Localizer to Kyle Banks in the credits. And it'll just create a whole database of all these conversions, and it'll hook that into this process as well. This way people can have their real name or whatever they want to actually be credited with in the credits. So I think that's going to be cool. So thanks for everyone who's helping with the localization, and thanks to iLox who's been building that tool. Alright, so let's get to the monsters. So I've talked a few times about how I want the monsters in the world to be tied to creatures from Scottish folklore. So one I've been working on for a few months, one of my favorite creatures that I've discovered is something called the Sluag, and they were these creatures that would appear like flocks of birds and carry people away, and they were said to be the souls of restless sinners. So I've been working on this for a few months, but I cannot make it work. I've completely burnt out, and I haven't come up with anything that I like, so I think it's time to put it on hold and think about something else for a little bit. So aside from being inspired by Scottish folklore, the other constraint I have on the monster design is I want them to be humanoid-esque and not just crazy hell demons that kind of come out of nowhere. So I've shown these a few times and I haven't explained what they are, and I'm still not going to. But they're inspired by these statues that are kind of scattered throughout Edinburgh. And here's one in an area called Stockbridge. They're these very, very striking statues, which obviously don't move because they're just statues, and it just stands in the water. And every time I come by here, I just have to take a video of it because it's just so striking. So these kind of, have always been a little bit in the back of my mind in terms of the monster design. So by combining the Scottish folklore with this kind of humanoid grounding, I wanted to think about what other monsters there are in Scottish folklore. And of course the most famous is Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster. So I got to thinking about what it is about Nessie that's so interesting, and I was thinking about how people come from all over the world to try to catch a glimpse of her, and they travel to Loch Ness from wherever they're from, and I was thinking, what if that was actually the idea of the monster? That it was actually a lure and it was trying to, bring unwary travelers towards it. So this kind of got the ideas going, and I started to think about how I could incorporate this into a monster design. And of course, the big question with Nessie is what is below the surface, right? That's what everyone wants to find out. And so, as the creator, I get to have kind of creative license to come up with whatever I want. And so, combining that with the idea of it being humanoid, I was trying to think about how this could work, and I thought about the chain chomps from Mario. And what happens if you combine the chain chomp with this humanoid design with the Loch Ness Monster? And I was thinking, well, what if underneath the surface, this lure is kind of hiding a large hand, a shadowy hand that is going to kind of reach out and grab you and pull you into the water. And so in my mind, I had this very clear image of this very enticing lure that looks happy and promising, and as you approach it, this kind of dark and depressing force is trying to pull you in. So that's the idea I had, and I set about building it. So I decided to try something new and live stream the modeling on Discord, and luckily, being a professional, it worked the first time. No, the first pass did not go very well. Anyways, as I said, so I've been streaming a little bit on Discord, and I'm thinking that I might start doing a little bit on YouTube or Twitch as well, so if you're interested in that, let me know. But anyways, this is some clips that were taken from that stream. So I first started by making just a large hand, and as I was working on this, I was thinking about the idea of the chain chomp and how maybe the arm is kind of fixed underwater, and as you approach it, it can kind of run out and charge at you and try and grab you and pull you in, but it has a fixed range, and that's how the chain chomp kind of comes into things. And so I continued on this and the idea of this lure, and I came up with something where there's a small, thin part of the creature that kind of comes out from above, from under the water to reach out above the water, and it would glow similar to the activatable objects like the birds and other creatures in the game. And so as a player, the first time you see this, it would be, you would be kind of tricked into thinking that this is a happy thing because, the earlier parts of the game, you've been kind of activating these things with a similar style. And then as you approach it, which you'd be kind of coaxed to do by this lure, it would kind of come out and try and grab you and pull you in. And so that's the idea, and the model turned out pretty well. I think this is actually probably the best hand I've ever modeled, to be honest, even though, it's not actually meant for a human model. The rigging went really, really well, and all the animation looks really crisp on it. All the weight painting's perfect, so I'm pretty happy with it. I did end up changing the lure. This is kind of an old design. Yeah, so the next thing to do was to move on to animation. So shout out to Codier, who has this amazing YouTube video. It's just 1 minute long, and it's 10 steps for procedural animation. And so I use this as a reference, and then I brought this into my own procedural animation system, which I've been using for like the dog petting and opening doors and everything. And again, being a professional, it worked the first time. Just kidding. So eventually I did get this working, and again, doing this all on stream added a lot of pressure, but it was a lot of fun. So I got this working, and you can see here how basically as you move the creature around, its hands are going to stay fixed to the ground. That was the first thing to get working. And then the next was to build in like stepping logic so that you see the little yellow dots, those are essentially a reference position, and so as the hands get too far from the reference position, it'll step towards them. And again, huge shout out to Codier. I'll leave a link to his video in the description because it kind of helped sort out all the different nitty pieces of this. But that's the idea. So it's this hand that's kind of under the water, the lure is kind of coming out, blowing in the wind, looking enticing. And as the player comes close, it's going to kind of lunge out and try and grab them and pull them under. And so I think this will only show up a couple times in the game because obviously once you've seen it once or twice, you're not going to be tricked again. However, I do think it's going to be interesting, it's spooky, it kind of fits all my different themes. It's very loosely inspired by Nessie, it stays with kind of a humanoid-esque design, and yet it's still creepy and dark and everything. So obviously there's a lot of work left to go on this. Like, this is very, very early. Can't stress that enough. This is very early, much earlier than I normally show on the devlogs, but again, I just wanted to give you guys an update on where we're at with the monsters, and being devlog number 13, it just seemed, very fitting that this would be the one to finally introduce something. So yeah, leave me your thoughts down below what you think about this. Again, can't stress enough how early this is, but I do want to get your thoughts. The creature's probably not going to come far out of the water, just a little bit, just enough within a few meters of the surface to grab the player, or to grab the girl. So it's not going to walk a ton, but here's a look at basically the current state of it. So I know what you're thinking, this looks pretty silly, and you're right, it does. This is just purely to kind of test the walking logic and the procedural movement. This is not how the monster is actually going to behave. So currently it's not hooked into any of the other systems of the game, it doesn't know about the player, it doesn't do anything, it just walks straight in a line. So the way it's actually going to work is it'll come just out of the water about a meter, let's say about here, and it'll try and grab the player from there, and it'll stop, it won't actually keep walking. The arm that's kind of dragging behind it right now, all silly-like, will be kind of fixed in place, and it'll grow with the movement as needed. So there's a lot of work left to be done there to bring it into the rest of the systems, to make it look good, to make it sound good. But I wanted to give you guys this really early look just to get some early feedback, and also to give you some insight into how I'm thinking about the monsters, and how I'm tying them into the themes of the game, into the Scottish vibe, into the themes of mental health and all that. So hopefully this was interesting. Again, thanks for understanding how early this is. But that's going to be it for this devlog. Hopefully in the next one I'll have a little bit more of an update on how it's actually fitting into the rest of the game. So in the meantime, leave your thoughts down below, don't forget to like and subscribe and all that YouTube stuff, and if you really want to support the game, you can wishlist it on Steam, there'll be a link for that down in the description. But for now, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.